R. Kelly was just sentenced on charges of racketeering and sex trafficking. Joining me now with more on this developing news is NBC's Ron Allen, who's outside the courtroom in Brooklyn, New York. Ron, what can you tell us about the sentence?
The sentence amounts to 30 years, which is essentially a life sentence, which is what the prosecution was asking for. The judge's remarks were as searing as you will perhaps ever hear in a courtroom, as she just tore into R. Kelly as she was reading out why she was imposing this sentence. She said that she talked about how he had such great advantages. Kelly's attorneys argued for a lesser sentence, saying that he'd been a victim of childhood sexual abuse, saying that he'd grown up in a violent environment, saying that there were all these reasons that were mitigating factors. But the judge said that those were explanations, but not an excuse for his behavior. She described it as violent, cruelty, controlling, calculated, carefully planned with regularity over a period of 25 years. Remember, the charge is racketeering, that he was the head of a criminal enterprise, essentially, that was all about his own personal sexual gratification, that again went on for some 25 years. She said that it is an enterprise, that you lured young people and took control of their lives, that you had enablers. She talked a lot about the engineers, drivers, managers, others who were in his orbit, who she described as going out, minions who went out to malls and lured young people into his orbit. She named some by name and wondered what was going to happen to them. How could this happen? How could all these people be around him letting this happen? She talked about Aaliyah, who was, of course, R. Kelly's first victim. She was a young girl who was 13 or 14 years old when the judge said that R. Kelly began attacking her sexually, essentially. Aaliyah, of course, was a rising star who came into R. Kelly's orbit and died years later in a plane crash that was unrelated to R. Kelly. She says, the judge, Ann Donnelly, says, "You were on the top of this enterprise." And talking about his victims, she said, "You raped them, you beat them, you separated them from their families." It was just an incredible litany of abuse that the judge accused R. Kelly of. She said there was an indifference to human suffering. There was sheer brutality. You left a trail of broken lives in your wake. This was serial rape, sexual abuse, again, over a long period of times. And again, she sentenced him to what amounts to 30 years. There were 9 counts. If you add it all up, these are sentences that are running concurrently. If you add it all up, 10 years for this, 20 years for that, it added up, by my math, to almost to hundreds of years, essentially, that she was sentencing R. Kelly to, but it comes out to about 30 years. But the bottom line is that it's a maximum sentence. It's a life in prison for R. Kelly, a sentence, and he still has more criminal cases ahead of him. But today, again, the judge, Ann Donnelly, essentially threw the book at him, sentencing him in a way that pretty much assures that R. Kelly will spend the rest of his life in prison.